Why hiring a tenant representative will not increase your rent and why using one creates value. Tenants often represent themselves because the landlord argues it will be forced to increase the rental rate to pay for the tenant representative's commission. The landlord claims that if the tenant does not hire a representative, that they will give the tenant a lower rental rate because it saves them from paying a commission. Well, let's think about this. If the landlord has to increase the rent to cover the tenant representative's commission, but will reduce the rent if one is not involved, then what difference does it make to the landlord? If this scenario were true, the result would be a zero-sum game, meaning the landlord would receive the exact same amount of money at the end of the tenant's lease term. By way of example, let's assume a landlord will charge $100 in rent if no tenant representative is involved, but has to charge $102 to recoup the additional commission if the tenant elects representation. Under the scenario where the landlord charges an extra $2 to recoup the cost of the additional commission, the net rent received by the landlord is still $100. The net effect is exactly the same amount of rent, so the landlord should not care either way if the scenario were true. Furthermore, if a tenant representative's involvement did increase the rental rate, landlords everywhere would encourage the involvement of a tenant rep broker. Why, you might ask? Because buildings are valued using a multiple of rents, capitalizing the income received from tenants. So the higher the rents, the more the building is worth. Anything that increases the rental rate is a good thing for the landlord. So if a commission actually increased the rental rate, the landlord would never make an argument against using a tenant representative. So the obvious question is, why would a landlord make such a claim? The answer is simple. Landlords don't want a tenant representative involved because using one will cause the opposite to happen. A good tenant representative will lower the rental rate, minimize the lease term, negotiate various lease provisions, and minimize the tenant's risk both financially and legally. All of this will make the building less valuable, which is the primary reason landlords argue against the use of a tenant representative. And don't forget this commonly unknown fact. The landlord's agent will make less money on your lease if you have representation. This is because the tenant representative is compensated by taking a portion of the commission that is paid to the landlord's agent. This is very similar to residential real estate, where the sellers and buyer's realtors split the commission paid by the seller. So, this is one of the biggest reasons some landlord agents discourage the involvement of a tenant representative, because they personally make less on your lease if one is involved. Still, some tenants think they can negotiate and capture part of the brokerage fee. We've never seen it actually happen. While the tenant may negotiate to get the rate dropped a few percent and think they are capturing that fee, they're never privileged to the actual document between the landlord's agent and the landlord. And virtually 100% of the time, the landlord's agent is likely getting a full fee. Sure, the landlord might drop the rental rate some to create the illusion of cost savings, but the rental rate would have dropped by far more if the tenant had a good tenant representative. Like a good auctioneer, a professional tenant representative brings out the serious bidders, and that market pressure assures a tenant of the best possible pricing. There's a reason that virtually all Fortune 500 firms use professional representation on their leases. It saves them money, saves them time, and reduces risk. You don't go to court with a lawsuit involving hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars without very good representation. Don't do it with a lease liability either. Hire the very best tenant representative that you can find.